You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. It's fast, fun, free, daily deep dive Bible, and right now we're working on the book of Nehemiah. If you're new, welcome. You can jump in right here, or you can always go back and start at the beginning of any season. The whole podcast is available in an easy-to-use format at thetmbh.com.
Here's a list of some of the amazing things that have happened historically on September 27th. First of all, Aaron, who's listening to this right now, is your birthday on September 27th, so happy early birthday. High five over that. Sarah, also, who's listening, you know that your birthday is September 27th. Also, there are some famous people born on September 27th. That's a big deal. Avril Lavigne is his September 27th birthday. Meatloaf, September 27th. Mike Schmidt, Hall of Famer. It's a pretty big deal. Samuel Adams, one of the founding fathers. Jenna Ortega. Cosimo Medici. That's a magnificent list of September 27th. It seems like this is a particularly unique and blessed day, given this roster of birthday festivities associated with the date. But it's particularly famous because in the year 444 BC, on exactly September 27th, a religious revival broke out in recently rebuilt Jerusalem under the leadership of two rock stars of historic Jewish faith, Nehemiah and Ezra the priest, both there at once. This religious revival started that day, and it changed not only the course of ancient history, but it changed the course of history all the way up till this moment right now when you and I are talking. And that is the part of the Bible that we are at right now in our little survey or walkthrough here of Nehemiah. That's what happens in Nehemiah chapter 8 and verse 1. And look, I'm giving you that whole big giant setup the way that I am because I think that with every book, there's a fatigue point. I certainly observe this. Anybody who's ever taught through the book of Acts will tell you there's a fatigue point that happens at about the 2/3 mark. You're coming off some repetition. Paul tells a story of how he became a Christian a bunch of times, and it starts to feel like, oh, okay, I get it. I know I'm not supposed to be dismissive because it's the Bible, but, people are getting fidgety because I feel like they kind of get it. Nehemiah, this is the fatigue point of this book. We just came off a big, long repetition in chapter 7 of stuff that goes all the way back and repeats almost verbatim Ezra chapter 2. And it feels like we're into mop-up duty now. The temple's rebuilt, the walls are rebuilt, Sanballat and Geshem and Tobiah, they're all defeated and out of the picture. And now it's just, then they all lived happily ever after. Fatigue point, and has all the recipes of a fatigue point. But it shouldn't be a fatigue point because it's September 27th, 444 BC, one of the most consequential days in the history of humankind that you and I do not know off the top of our heads, because this one, for whatever reason, isn't quite infamous enough to be known simply by a date. But it is a big enough deal to be known simply by a date because few things have ever happened that have more shaped how things have unfolded. The Jewish people, they were on the fence. They were on a razor's edge coming into this little chunk of Bible right here. Will they be yet another people forgotten to history, absorbed into the surrounding cultures and mashed into the uniculture, the monoculture? Or will they somehow continue to choose the hard way, the way of being a people set apart and different, who are very defensive of their own cultural boundaries and even genealogical boundaries, and in doing so, be this strange outlier group that by merit of their sheer existence forces everyone to respond to them in a political sense, in a religious sense, for the rest of forever. Well, look, we're talking about them, and we're talking about the Hebrew scriptures, so clearly, the next few chapters are going to fall off the razor's edge toward the latter, toward being memorable. Well, how do they do it? On paper, it seems like they got a good deal from a couple of Achaemenid Persian kings, and things bounced their way. They had political favor, and they built some buildings, and the buildings were something they could rally around, and as a result, they got their feet underneath them. A closer look at this makes it clear that that doesn't matter for much. Lots of people built buildings, religious temples, whatever in the ancient world. It is what happens right here, once again, starting on September 27th, 444 BC, that sets the trajectory for who they're going to be and the effect they're going to have on the world around them moving forward. Here we go. You'll recall yesterday I said that Nehemiah chapter 7 bleeds over into chapter 8. It's an odd and unfortunate division between the chapters. So just pretend like I'm not reading the end of Nehemiah chapter 7 for this first sentence or phrase, and pretend like it's all part of Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 1. Here we go. When the 7th month came, and the Israelites had settled in their towns, all the people assembled as one man in the square before the water gate. Now, that 7-month thing, that could throw you off a little bit. It's like, 7th month? That's July. It's not September. What are you people doing? Totally wrong on the dates. We're getting the date wrong. It should be July 27th, 444. But we're talking about a different calendar, the Julian calendar, and then the Gregorian reforms from the Middle Ages that make the calendar that you and I are used to. That's a long, long, long ways away at this point. So we're talking about an ancient Hebrew calendar. 7th month corresponds with September. We know for sure this is the date, September 27th, 444 BC. And then there are two key lines here in the next part. One is that they all assembled together in a square before the water gate. Now, you will recall that in the past, when I was describing the walled-in and rebuilt portion of Jerusalem at this time, that we likened it to Italy, with the temple being clear up at the north part, the top part of the boot, and then at the bottom part of the gate, remember there was a little mnemonic device that we used. What do you kick the poop with? You kick the poop with the toe of your boot. So the dung gate is down at the bottom of the boot. That's your dung gate, as far away from the temple as can possibly be. I think it kind of makes sense. I see what they're doing there. So they're gathering before something called the water gate. That is up at, again, I keep using this term when I describe Italy, and I'm sorry, I don't mean anything by it, but Italy has a flared boot top, right? And so the flared boot top kind of creates two armpit areas. Like where it starts to round the corner into the flared boot top is where the water gate is at. Or to put it another way, if the temple is at 12 o'clock on a clock, the water gate, even though this is an oddly skinny clock, would be at like 2 o'clock, something like that. So it's about a quarter of the total length of the city away from the temple complex in a neighborhood, a place that Nehemiah wanted to see filled with houses and repopulated. And apparently there was enough room here in this particular spot, in this phase of rebuilding, for everybody, it says all the people, to gather together. So one point that's important here is that they're meeting at the water gate. The second point that is important is that they are coming with unity. So look, we've made progress, right? What's the big task of Ezra and Nehemiah, and even in a way Zerubbabel, and even in a way Mordecai and Esther, all the leaders of the Jewish people during this era of the return? What's their big task? It's keep their people alive and rebuild the people. And as we have often lamented, when you read back through most of the Old Testament, when there is unity, it's usually either short-lived around something good or long-lived around something real stupid and destructive. So to see this unity after an extended period of unity, not perfect unity, but pretty good unity, is a very big deal. They told Ezra the scribe to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded for Israel. Wait, so who initiated all of this again? They told Ezra. Oh, okay. My head's spinning a little bit here. I thought we were in Nehemiah, not Ezra, right? But surprise, these guys overlap. They're contemporaries. They're pals, or at least it seems like they get along well enough. They're pulling the cart in the same direction at any rate. And this is a time where they both overlap. They're both in town at the same moment. Ezra is a scribe and a priest. Nehemiah is an administrator, a political leader. I guess you could call him a military leader as well. These two have different skill sets. They're good at different things. And so the fact that they are both on screen here at the same time means that this is quite the showing of a unified front from the leadership as well. It's not just the crowds who are unified, but these two very different leaders with very different skill sets and tactics. They're both involved in this religious revival that is starting here on September 27th, 444 BC, during the reign of Artaxerxes I of Persia. But it's the crowds, the mob, who demands that Ezra read the Bible to them. They told Ezra the scribe to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded for Israel. There are mob things going on in the world right now as I am reading this. Wow, interestingly, the mob things involve Jews and Israel. And I said this was a very impactful turning point in history. But mobs, what they usually do is they make chaos and they burn things and they break things and they yell about things as a way to demand attention or to destabilize or to express dissatisfaction with a leader. Sometimes you need a mob to do that. Lately, I think mobs have been more of an artificial thing crafted by power brokers who try to create certain optics of chaos to nudge political outcomes in a certain direction. But generally, mobs have mostly peaceful protests where they burn down buildings and beat people and clash with police. So they told Ezra the scribe to bring out the book of the law. Well, that doesn't sound violent at all. You get a mob together with banners and they're all packed in and it's sweaty and dusty. What do they start chanting at this spontaneous mob? Read the Bible! Read the Bible! Read the Bible! What the heck is going on? This is an incredible moment. Remember, these people are still in the throes of economic despair. Just because Nehemiah went and told the nobles and others who were oppressing the rank and file normal people among the returning exiles, just because he told them, 2 chapters ago to knock it off, it doesn't mean that the economy is healed and suddenly all injustice is gone. That takes a minute. These are people who are still dealing with things that it would be completely reasonable for them to melt down publicly over, yet instead they assemble as a mob and demand to have somebody get out the Bible and read it to them. Now, I'm saying the Bible a little bit tongue-in-cheekly because it's not the Bible as we understand it yet at this point. They want the law of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch, the part of our Bible or the Hebrew Scriptures where God reveals his character and his expectations and plan and vehicle to carry forward the redemptive plan to his chosen people, in part in the form of rules. Rules about how to do religious things, rules about how to do civil things, rules about how to do personal maintenance and clean and unclean sort of things. He lays all of this stuff out, and any one of those rules in and of itself, I mean, you got a fairly decent chance of it being the kind of thing that you would giggle at a little bit because it just doesn't sound like now, and now we're so enlightened and we know how the things are. But when you look at those rules and those laws as a whole, it adds up to something very unique, very profound, and very revelatory of the character of the God who is issuing this law. And that law, as we're going to discuss in the coming days, is about far more than do this and don't do that. It is, again, a far more robust and complex and important expression of the values of God and direction setter for a culture and a people than the word law in our current context might suggest. There's no clean, good spot to break as we're talking about the revival of September 27th, 444 BC. So we're just going to hit pause there and we're going to pick up and we're going to find out what happened when they got out the book of the law next time around. These next few chapters are anything but mop-up duty. Now we're getting into the juicy stuff. Now we're getting into the stuff that sets the table for the world of Jesus a few hundred years after this stuff goes down, but that also sets the table for the world you live in. This is going to be interesting and fun. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.
This podcast exists because many of you kick in to make it happen, even though you don't have to. Learn more at thetmbh.com/support. We're grateful because that supports our family.